Okay, so detail the purpose of the Espionage and Sedition Acts of 1917. Describe the effects of these acts and how many view these acts as unconstitutional.
Pretty wild stuff, right, Cal? Speaking of VAW, yeah. All right, as you're working on moving them around, check these bell ringers. Put those grades in a while for you. That's one for the week. All right. Here. Okay. Let's go with the shoulder. Okay. We're doing it fine. The way you distinguish between the class. No, okay. Just wanted to say that. All right. I know. Then the propaganda piece activity.
Yeah.
Style. What do you want? We're going to do the news yesterday. You're missing one. You weren't here, what, Tuesday or Wednesday? You were fine. You were doing watch the video. You're playing flag football with Young Carlos Saturday. Yeah, you asked me yesterday. Hey, you play football Saturday. So playing some of the other stuff. Oh, I would.
Oh, no.
What's that?
Oh, are they good?
You're not seeing the Amish play sports? Oh, I think softball. I think I can hold my own in football. So we'll stay on volleyball. Yeah, you're not just like volleyball? No.
You should see what that looks like outside of grads. Like outside of grads, where they have that big bar that I would drop.
All right.
Marcus off for one day. I was heading to work, and there's like 15 or 20 Amish just outside.
Really?
They're just playing home.
Playing spikes. Well, I'm not playing. I'm pretty busy Saturday, so.
Pretty busy.
Yeah. Won't be able to make it. Probably a good thing. Take like much fun.
I'll give you another minute to finish up here. Okay, all right. So what do we have here? Detail the importance, the purpose of the Espionage and Sedition Acts of 1917. So when did we join the war? Matt, what year did we join the war? No. 1917. Yeah, there you go. Good job. Good job. So what finally pushed us into World War One? So if we had to talk about the influences, what caused us to maybe get involved in this war? Noah?
When Great Britain sent a message going to Mexico.
Yeah, what was that called? What was that telegram or note called? Yeah, the Zimmerman telegram. Good job. Good job. So if you see that on the exam, you see that on the test, what influences pushed the United States in the war? Well, the Lusitania in 1915, that was kind of shifting us towards the Allied powers, okay, making that decision because of unrestricted submarine warfare. But was that enough? No, no. Finally, 1917 with the Zimmerman telegram, that was the last straw, right? That was the final straw for us to get involved. And Woodrow Wilson, okay, he actually ran on his second term as president of how he kept the United States out of war. And that's what won him the presidency. And not a year later, already here we are getting involved in World War One. And it kind of just shows the atmosphere of the United States at this point. It's like, oh, well, we're going to try to make as much money, as much profit off this conflict as possible. And then sooner or later, because of Lusitania, because of the Zimmerman telegram, we had no other choice. We had to get involved. We had to intervene. And Woodrow Wilson, because of staying out for so long, there was a reason for it, because of large immigrant populations in the United States. So what was the purpose of this Espionage and Sedition Act? What was it? Gabe, what do you have?
So that you can basically have like speaker ideas or like have like their opinion on the board, like spread because they're gonna want that out really.
Okay, all right. So if you're talking badly about the United States, if you're talking bad about the government during a time of warfare, then you should be thrown in jail, right? You should be fined. You should be made an example of. That this isn't allowed, right? Finally, here the United States is involved in a European conflict, and we need to make sure that we can prevent an internal attack, right? That we can prevent any type of revolt or rebellion from occurring in the United States because we have large immigrant populations. We're a melting pot, right? And if this would get out of hand, who knows what could happen? We could break down from really the inside out. Okay, even if we're fighting this war in Europe, we could have conflicts here in the United States if we aren't, I guess you could say, particular about this. So the Espionage and Sedition Acts were a way to try to keep, I guess you could say, things down, right? To make sure that people wouldn't start a riot or rebellion. And it went a little too far, though, right? Many people talk about how this was taking away their freedom of speech, freedom of expression and assembly, taking away their First Amendment right. And that's totally unconstitutional, right? But in a time of war, Woodrow Wilson thought this was necessary. So what were some examples in the video of the Espionage Acts and even the Sedition Act that were expressed? What examples did you catch in that? Noah, go ahead. Yeah, and it just goes to show that they're listening to your conversations, right? Yeah, the government stepping in and listening to your conversations, making sure that you're not maybe a German sympathizer or a spy. And if you're speaking another language other than English, well, most likely you're going to be placed in jail. You're going to be fined. And they're literally showing videos of people getting ripped out of their own homes of maybe being a spy or a German sympathizer. And here in Central PA, like I talked about, there's a big German culture, right? German heritage, ancestry. And this was a big concern for many political officials, public officials, and even citizens were alarmed. It's like, oh, well, here we came to the United States because of these rights and freedoms that were presented to us that are above the government. And now here the government is infringing on that First Amendment right. So it just kind of shows where the US is at. It's like even in time of war, we could turn and shift towards maybe an authoritarian rule in some sort of manner. All right, that will later change. Like I said, with the Espionage Sedition Acts, this will apply later to communism. Okay, this Red Scare that's spreading all throughout the United States. With the Russian Revolution, okay, this communist revolution happening in Europe. Okay, this was a fear that maybe communism will spread over to the United States. And the FBI increased. It was really created in 1917 because of World War One, because the Espionage and Sedition Acts. And this will be applied even more moving up to World War II and even after World War II. And this was a scary time. It was almost like a witch hunt in a way. All right, is there any questions, guys? I also said yesterday about how we were kind of shifting away from that German culture with the sauerkraut, the Liberty cabbage. I thought that was interesting to hear about how we're just trying to disassociate ourselves as American culture away from this German culture during this time of war, and just showing and depicting the true enemy. All right, is there any questions, guys? You good? Okay. Terms for today. What do you think, Eddie? Do you think the Espionage and Sedition Acts were justified? Do you think that was something that Woodrow Wilson should have done?
No.
Why not?
It goes against the freedom of speech.
Okay, yeah, it goes against their fundamental rights, right? But in a time of war, do you see why he made the decision? Yeah, okay, all right. All right, so we got Doughboys. I know I talked about that already. Convoy system and Committee on Public Information. That one I should have showed yesterday with propaganda, but again, you have it now. You have it now. You finished already? What, you copy and paste?
Look at the second.
All right, go ahead. Ooh. Propaganda. Okay. Check it out right now before we start. How was the field trip yesterday? Yeah? You went to the Capitol building, right? Nice. Cool. All right, Doughboys, what do we got? What do we got? Griffin, what do you have, man?
It's a popular nickname for American Tribune.
Yeah, good job. So this is whenever you hear about Doughboys, whenever you hear that term, that a name for soldiers. That's referring to the World War I soldier. Okay. And I think I talked about this before. How'd they get the name? You remember? I think it was in the trivia at the beginning of the year. I think I talked about this. No? All right, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Convoy system. What is that? What is a convoy system? Cassidy, what do you have? Yeah, good job. Good job. So with the German U-boats, submarines out in the Atlantic shooting down many cargo ships, supply ships, and we all know at the Lusitania in 1915, it was important that we would protect our supplies and armaments and troops getting across the Atlantic to fight this war in Europe. All right. So the way we're going to do that is having all these ships come back together in order, almost like protection, right? And we're going to continue that zigzag motion across the Atlantic to make sure that these submarines don't have an easy target to take down these ships. All right, Committee on Public Information. What do we got here? Kale, what do you got? Yeah, good job. So this was a committee created by really Woodrow Wilson to help promote the war effort. So creating propaganda, creating forms of media to try to enhance participation in the war. Okay, I know I talked about victory guards yesterday. Remember that? Okay, I know I talked about how a lot of these propaganda pieces were promoting young men to get involved in the war, to enlist in the Selective Service Act. So again, this is a way to try to promote the war for the people. Okay, constantly in the media, constantly within newspapers, magazines, articles, and in this case, radio. Okay, over the radio. I know radio is kind of new at this time though. All right, so let's get to it here. All right, so women in the war. Here we go, women in the war. So I know I talked during the Progressive era how women were advancing during this time period in the early 1900s and late 1800s, given more opportunities in the workplace and education, okay, and even holding jobs, like I said, for the workplace. That really didn't come about, like I mentioned, until World War One. Okay, yeah, the Progressive era helped out a lot. Okay, it helped with a lot of these activist movements. But in all reality, we know with conflicts like such as World War One, women's role during that war as nurses, as really helping along with the war production in many factories and industries. This is actually what pushed women to get that right, that opportunity to vote for women's suffrage. And I know I talked about the 19th Amendment already. So again, yeah, the progressive movement helped out a lot. Okay, all these activist movements, all these marches on political buildings and public buildings, this was very beneficial. But in all reality, the war really benefited the women out for much of these opportunities. Okay, one being the right to vote, the 19th Amendment. So American Red Cross created right at the time of World War One. Still around today. So women stepping up at home, on the home front, okay, in many of these really hospitals that help these soldiers get back on the battlefield. All right, so like I was saying with the vocab term, doughboys, okay, these were the men that were going over to fight the war. Okay, like I said before, Spanish-American War was the only war that we actually knew what the fighting was like. And many soldiers in the United States, many young men glorified it. They thought war was like a game. The success of this splendid little war was something that many Americans just pound their chest on. It's like, oh, well, we can get involved in Europe, no problem. We can take out Germany, no problem. But in all reality, we had no idea exactly what the war was like. Okay, we didn't have a clue of what type of weaponry, new forms of technology were on the battlefield. In a way, we were very optimistic about the conflict. We thought we could just go over, show our American spirit, and push through the German lines, no problem. But that wouldn't be the case. But the Doughboys were a way of optimism for the Allied powers. So Great Britain and France, they've been fighting on this Western Front for a long period of time, for over 3 years now. And finally, when the United States comes, it's more like a moral victory for the Allied powers. Okay, obviously they're getting more supplies. They're getting more food in the trenches, right? They're getting more resources. And as these American troops come over, they are really lifting the spirits of the Allied powers. Okay, when you hear about all of America came over and just pushed the front lines of the Germans back and we won this war, in all reality, that wasn't the case. What really helped was this constant supplies, the constant motivation, and really just knowing that another country with industrial power, with supplies and armaments and really food in the trenches is what really pushed the Allied powers to win this war. Germany kind of was on their last strength, right? They were really in this drawn out war. Okay, we'll talk about it. Russia leaves the Eastern Front, but at the same time, the United States is coming. Okay, and they are supplying the front lines with all the resources, armaments they have. And I mentioned it yesterday. The United States, #1 industrial power in the world at this point, and agricultural power in the world. So obviously, if they're going to join the side of the Allied powers, they're most likely going to see the clear advantage. We already talked too about Great Britain. They controlled communication. They had the strongest navy. Here, the United States has the third largest navy. So obviously, you can see how this is going to tip the tide of the war. But Doughboys got the name really during the Mexican-American War as they're marching through the desert land. I know I talked about that dry temperature, the dry atmosphere. A lot of the dirt was kicking up on their face. It looked like they're in a bakery. It looked like they're in a baker shop. So kind of that's why they got the name Doughboys, which I thought was kind of funny. All right, here's a look of what the Doughboys look like. Not the Pillsbury Doughboy, but just the outfit. Okay. As you can see, there wasn't much armor or anything like that. There's no real solid helmet for these American troops. And that just goes to show how maybe America wasn't really prepared for this conflict. Any type of bullets is going to rip through that type of uniform, and that hat's not going to do anything on the battlefield. But again, it just maybe shows how the US really wasn't prepared for this new style of warfare. It almost looks like he's a Boy Scout or something, right? Yeah. I don't know if you can say that's really prepared for battle, but anyway, with the sheer numbers, with the sheer supplies and armaments coming across, and just food alone and morale, and that's what pushed the Allied powers over the Central powers. Well, that's the look of your typical World War I soldier coming from America. All right, the bloody stalemate, like I was saying, the supply line is what really kicked it off for the United States and the Allied powers. All right, this is what was going to be the greatest benefit. And the convoy system allowed for the US to help the Allied powers out with supplies and armaments. So as they're making the trip, the long trip across the Atlantic, it was important that there was protection. These U-boats were still out in the open water. It was still very hard to see exactly where these U-boats were attacking from. And at this point, yeah, there was depth charges, but they're kind of new to the battlefield, new to the new forms of technology and weaponry. And it was difficult to really target these U-boats underwater. So it was important, like I said, to have some sort of convoy system intact to make sure that you can protect your supplies, your troops getting across the Atlantic Ocean. And we talked the other day with the Zimmerman telegram. Was it realistic that Germany could do this? Could Germany travel these troops and armaments across the Atlantic? No, right? We all know with the Royal Navy, Great Britain's Navy, and the United States Navy, it was impossible for them to maybe unleash an attack or invasion across the Atlantic, along with that Zimmerman telegram. But with the United States, with Great Britain on their side, it just goes to show the Allies really controlled the water, that they had the, I guess, the superiority when advancing across the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, these U-boats could probably pick off a couple of cargo ships, but for the most part, the US was protected. And I mentioned it before, the zigzags, okay, moving in zigzags to prevent any type of clear attack from these submarines. It was much harder to target a ship if they're moving in a zigzag motion, not just a straight line. All right, so we'll talk about this more on Monday, but the Russian Revolution occurs right around 1917 as the United States is getting involved. So Russia will eventually leave the war, okay? And I'll talk about that more on Monday, like I said. But Russia will eventually leave the war, but the United States will join. And this is going to show that Germany just really can't hold on any much longer. As one side's easing up on the Eastern Front, while the US is joining in on the Western Front. And this is going to be too much for the German army. Is there any questions on that, guys? Okay. Let me go over the assignment here with you. the PowerPoint the project presentation here, the battles. Again, you can work with a partner on this. Groups of 3 are okay, I guess. You just gotta let me know who's involved with your your project here, your presentation. We'll pull this up a while. Because I can't get too in depth with these battles, I think it's important that you do some research and maybe hear some of your classmates' presentations on some of these battles. So this is what I like for Tuesday. This is going to be due. Presentations are going to be Tuesday. We'll work on that right before Thanksgiving break, and we can finish them up on that half day for Wednesday. So your goal is to pick one of the battles that are listed here below. So you're going to find, where did the battle take place and when? Okay, what led to the battle? So was there something that occurred that pushed for this battle to happen? So where did this battle originate from? Maybe it was another battle. Maybe it was a retreat or an invasion, whatever it might be. Conditions of the battle. So weather, type of battle. Was it in the trenches? Was it in the open air, right in the sky, since dog fights were big at this point? Or was it across the Atlantic Ocean? Was it a fight in the Mediterranean Sea, the North Sea? Again, you got to find that out. Who was involved? Countries and key people. So maybe some of these battles were before the United States got involved. Maybe one of these battles are on the Eastern Front or the Western Front. Again, that's for you to find out. Types of weapon used during the battle. So mostly with trench warfare, you're going to find the same weapons, but if it's out in the open water, obviously it's going to be a little bit different. So you can look up some of these forms of technology, forms of weaponry that were used in this environment. Primary resource and political cartoon. So I know it might be hard to find a political cartoon for some of these battles, but just try to find something, a picture that depicts the battle itself. Okay, that's fine too. Just explain it though. And a primary resource, what is a primary resource? What is that? Go ahead, Griffin. Yeah, first-hand account. Good job. This might be a quote, right? This might be some sort of saying that was involved with the battle. And I want you guys to explain it. So it's one thing just to show it up on your presentation, but I want you to explain it as well. So detail what's going on with this primary source. What is being expressed or explained? All right, the end result. Who won? Casualties, effect on the war in general. Maybe this is the tipping point. Maybe this is the turning point in the war, right? Or maybe it's the start towards the end, whatever it might be. And here's a rubric that is attached here at the bottom. Okay, is there any questions? So again, let me know what battle you choose. I'm going to put a discussion post at the bottom. Okay, I want to try to make sure we use all these battles up. I don't want to have any repeats in the class because that will get boring after a while. So I'm going to put a discussion post at the bottom. Just type in your name, who you're working with, and what battle that you're obviously maybe you're going to research. Okay, perfect. Again, Tuesday, these presentations are going to be due. I'll give you a little bit of time on Monday to work on them in class when I'm finished up with a lesson.